Thank you everybody for coming along tonight. We've got a lot of questions to get through, so I'm going to get going. Really tonight is to answer a lot of questions that people had, and look, there was many questions that were actually sent through, which was fantastic. And we're going to cover as many of them as we can. So I want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land that we're all meeting on tonight and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging and extend that to anybody who is with us here this evening. Who am I? I'm Carly Saw. I'm the Director of Strawberry Seed Consulting. We've been around since 2013. I've been in HR for way, way too long. And, as a business owner myself, I understand the ups and downs that people go through, and it is never easy. There's always challenges that come your way, and part of what we do here is to try and help you through those. I do need to just point out again that we did win the premiership this year. So this is my gorgeous team. We've had a few changes in our team over the month of November, with a few team members leaving, and we've got some new ones starting in the new year. So, like every business, we have changes. And so this is my lovely team. And at Strawberry Seed, we really try and concentrate on helping people with their HR and their recruitment and helping them navigate the sort of tricky issues that you guys have shared with us tonight. So the way that I've decided to structure tonight is around themes, because there's really 5 distinct themes that most of the questions came from. And these are around time and attendance, leave and sort of fairness in that space, performance and feedback and expectations, attitude, resistance to change, leadership challenges and authority, and team dynamics, cliques and conflict. So there were sort of 5 sort of areas that came out. So we're going to go through and address those 5 areas. I do want to point out though that there were there were some questions that were put in that were very broad areas like performance reviews or something like that. So, and we've done a lot of webinars already. And when I send out the recording for this, I'll point out some of the ones that we've already done, even most recently, that will cover some of the issues people raised. And there's also some things that came up which we're going to cover in more depth next year because they're a little bit big for tonight. But we're going to go through as many as we can. And at the end, I'm more than happy for people to throw some more questions in the Q&A and answer them for you. So I'm going to start off by going through the theme of attendance and, whoops, sorry, I just had another little bit of an issue. There we go. The theme of attendance, leave, and fairness to start off with. So, what are the sort of patterns that are reasonable to explore when it comes to things like attendance and particularly around leave? Because I did get quite a few questions on that, and it's certainly an area we'll explore in more next year. So, if you're wanting to address behaviour with people, and the sort of behaviours you'd want to address are things that are repeated. There's a pattern of behaviour, and you're starting to question reliability. And you really need to make sure it's not about saying, "Oh, I want to catch people out and find out what they're doing," because most of the time it's not that someone's trying to do the wrong thing, but there may be other things going on. And I think that the biggest thing about going into these conversations when you believe that there is a bit of a pattern you want to address is that you have to assume that may not have all the information. And what you don't want to do is go in with some sort of expectation that, oh, this person's just, trying to do the wrong thing, because more often than not, that's not actually the case at all. So the sort of things that you might want to address, whoops, a little bit far there. We go. Things like, and these are some of the examples that people brought up to us. So, when someone's having a lot of sick days and they seem to fall around public holidays or weekends, I did love that so many people just answered, can you just do the example questions that you used? So we've included a lot of those in here as well. When there's a lot of unpaid leave requests that aren't necessarily planned, or maybe, there's an expectation they can take unpaid leave whenever they like, or someone is always using their full allocation of leave, whereas other people tend to, be up and down and vary it. So there's some of the things that usually trigger somebody to want to have a conversation in this area. And what I think is really important to remember is this is a conversation. And the way that you go into this conversation is going to set the tone for it, because people are going to respond a lot better if they feel respected, if they feel like this is a check-in rather than actually someone accusing them of doing something wrong, because you may not have all the information. So the way you want to approach a conversation like this, you could start with something like, I wanted to check in with you because I've noticed a bit of a pattern of unplanned days off, and I just want to make sure that you're doing okay. So you're coming at it from a place of care and curiosity, not from a place of accusation. In things, other statements you might make are things like, I'm not assuming anything. I just want to understand what's been going on. And I care about you and how you're going, and I want to make sure that you're able to do your best work. And obviously when you're not being able to be here consistently, that can have an effect on it. So it's about those curious questions that you are going in with to understand what is happening with this employee. Once you've opened with that sort of curiosity, then you can sort of add your own observations, and they should absolutely be based on facts. The example we've got here is, over the last 2 months, your sick days have mostly fallen on Mondays. I want to check in with you to see how things are going for you and whether something might be contributing to that, because I've noticed a bit of a pattern, and I'm not sure if you're aware of it, because for some people, maybe they're not, or maybe they are. And the fact that you raise it might be the thing that brings it to their attention. Now, we literally have a issue we discussed at our team meeting today that one of our clients is going through with a similar sort of situation. Well, I guess in the same scope of around leave and what you can and can't do. And, the first questions that I often look at are, well, do we have all the information? Do we understand why the person, in this instance, a person's gone off on leave when someone's raised a performance issue with them, but the assumption is, oh, that's why they're on leave. But what if it isn't? And I think that's the thing that most people need to think about as they head into these conversations, that they may not know everything. And that's going to apply through a lot of things we talk about today. So what you want to do once you've, had that opportunity to have that, start the discussion with the employee, and you understand where it's coming from. And as I said, in the majority of times, people are actually, and we're saying sick leave, but often personal leave might be being used for other things too. Maybe they have a child or a partner that's got a lot of health issues, or a parent that's got a lot of health issues, and they haven't brought it to your attention. Maybe they have got some sort of underlying health issue that they haven't raised with you, that is causing it. And, so you can't just jump to any assumptions about what that habit looks like. I know one example from a while ago that I had was, someone wanted to talk to someone about having Mondays off, and they're like, oh, they must be out partying all weekend. Well, it turned out that their partner worked night shift on a Sunday night, and on a Monday morning, that was the one morning a week that they sort of didn't have any help to get the kids off and everything else. So it was actually causing them to end up being late. In that instance, it was about attendance and being late. But, again, assuming that they're late because of whatever reason you want to apply to it doesn't actually help address the situation. You've got to start with what you know. And so when people actually are clear on why you're raising it and what the expectations are moving forward, then that can sort of stop a lot of potential issues that might arise. So, saying to someone, look, I'm so glad that you shared that with me. It helps me understand where you're coming from. But you can also then share your expectations about what you need as a business owner to kind of make it fair. And it may be, sometimes the issues around things like this are, if someone, say, for example, shared that they've got a bit of a chronic health issue, it might be then going, well, okay, help us understand how we can support you. The reason what we're trying to do is we're trying to support everyone, because when there's inconsistency, when you're not being in, and you're taking a lot of your leave, rightfully so, that actually causes a flow-on effect to other team members, or a flow-on effect to our clients, because it's a lot of last minute. Would it be more helpful to have a more permanent, make a bit of a temporary adjustment to your hours or something to sort of help support you? Because your job as a manager is to look at all the stakeholders involved. And in this case, the stakeholders will be that employee, they'll be the business itself and what's viable for it, but also other team members and other people like patients or clients that might be affected. So, helping the employee understand that this is you trying to support everybody and try and find a solution is a much better way to approach it. Some of the things you might clarify as part of that conversation. And again, a lot of these examples can be really nuanced. And, when one of my team says, "Oh, can you tell me an answer to this?" I will always ask more questions because I want to have all the information before I answer. And, you know, is the issue you're having around when they're telling you? So, for example, we've had people who, when they're feeling sick the night before, like some people are just going to get sick overnight. And look, we're in a weird flu sort of season right now, and a lot of people are sick. People can't control that, but if it's an issue with the fact that they don't let you know until just before, they're supposed to start, having conversations where you set expectations that, like, look, if you're feeling a bit unwell the night before, let us know then. So we've got a little bit more time to plan, or how they notify you. Again, I actually don't care how people notify me. Like, I don't have an issue with that it's via text or because honestly, we live in the 21st century. But sometimes you might want to reset some expectations if you feel like people are sort of stepping outside of them. You might want to explain how medical certificates or evidence is needed and why. Now, one of the things I haven't mentioned yet is that when someone is taking a lot of personal leave, that is their entitlement to take personal leave. And just because you're not happy that they are taking a lot of it or they're taking it in a particular pattern, it's a really big thing to question whether someone's able to take it, particularly when they're providing evidence. That is an entitlement that they have. And so you want to tread very carefully around any conversations in this area. It's more about sort of saying, I've noticed that pattern. And because it's a change, I want to help understand, because if there's something I can do to support you or that maybe can help us all work better, that's the purpose of the conversation. It's not about making it a big deal that you've taken all your sick leave, because people have a right to do so and it's a protected right, and you can really open up some risk if you don't take these conversations carefully. But once somebody has exhausted their personal leave allocation, or beforehand, at any time, you can ask for medical evidence. But I definitely, once someone's exhausted what they've got, saying, look, from now on, because you don't have any leave accrued, we need you to provide evidence that you are entitled to be absent from work, and that must be a medical certificate. What personal leave is for and how to use it responsibly doesn't mean dictating exactly when and how people can use it, but maybe clarifying, and if so, this again is going to depend on the conversation, right? If someone's shared some information with you about it, you might say, well, that's actually not what it's for, and you might redirect them to another type of leave. And the other thing you might do is, if you have an EAP program or something like that, you might redirect them there. It's about having some consistency but also empathy. And when it comes to consistency, yes, it's about fairness, but it's not about fairness does not mean everything's equal. You can't be rigid and it's all one way or all the other, because there are circumstances that are nuanced in every situation. So what might apply in one situation might be different to another. But in terms of being consistent, it's about making sure you always explain your reason. Why you are exploring something or why you are questioning something, and providing that why makes a big difference. You want to make sure that you are consistent with your message that goes out so that nobody does feel targeted. But that doesn't mean that you might not make a different decision or might not address something differently based on the nuanced circumstances in every case. So you have to be flexible on that. And if someone's questioning, oh, but so-and-so got to do this, we're like, hang on, the circumstances when that person was able to do X, Y, and Z might be very different to the circumstances now. And so it's not always equal circumstances, so therefore it might not always be equal in terms of what's happening. And you want to check in regularly. Like if someone's, having a lot of sick leave or whatever, or if having these conversations, just continue to check back in and say, hey, how are you going? Are you doing okay? Is everything fine? Is there anything else we can do to help you? It's not about watching them like a hawk and making them feel like they're terrible people if they take their leave, because that's going to just really mess with your culture. But it's about making sure that you are just monitoring the situation. So a couple of the examples that were given as sort of questions when people have booked, one of them was around weekend sick leave patterns. So, what happens when you have someone that falls into a bit of a pattern that they're taking sick leave around weekends all the time. Again, just don't, you can't make assumptions that there is a particular reason that is not that it's not legitimate personal leave. Have those check-in conversations, see what's happening with them, see if it is something around health or home pressures or burnout or something completely unrelated. Don't just jump the gun and make decisions about what's happening. Um, if you believe someone is genuinely using them as RDOs, you can actually, I mean, you can request to have evidence in every instance. It's pretty easy to get. It's just an inconvenience. And from my perspective, I don't ask any of my team to provide a medical certificate. But if I had someone who was probably constantly using it all up, that they weren't disclosing that there was any other particular reason or condition or something that was happening about it, you are within your right to ask for it. But I always think you should balance the cultural issues versus the benefit of actually doing that. Now, this one comes up a lot when someone's using all of their sick leave allocation, but other people aren't. The number of days that people take is the number of days that they take. And you'll have some people that you'll have to force out the door because they are coming to work sick and getting everybody else sick on one hand. So that's presenteeism. And then on the other hand, you can sometimes get that extreme person who sees that entitlement of 10 days per year as that's my entitlement and I'm going to take it. At the end of the day, if they provide a medical certificate, if you've requested one, and there's not much you can do about it because at the end of you'd have to be basically looking at it and saying, I believe that you're fraudulently taking this and your reasons behind it. And if someone's provided a medical certificate, you're basically questioning that medical certificate. And you have to have some pretty good reasons to do that, and pretty good evidence. And that evidence, look, if you've got evidence that they've been on social media like every time they've taken a Friday off and they're, posting photos that they're somewhere else and all that kind of stuff, then yeah, then you can address it. But you need to start with the understanding and support before you jump into any disciplinary action. You can have the conversation, you can try and explore it more, but it's very rare that you would want to head down the place of disciplinary action unless you had some pretty good evidence. Unpaid leave is another one that comes up a lot. Look, there is some unpaid leave can come up in so many different circumstances. There is no entitlement to unpaid leave. That's just bottom line. There's no entitlement to it. So you have to. The key is to look at the circumstances every time, and not just say it's a basic no. It's going to depend on your staffing levels, what the business is doing, the reason they're asking for it. If they're asking for it because they don't have enough leave and their sisters just announced they're getting married overseas, then, work with them to try and you might accept that. But whereas it's someone just saying, well, I want to take 6 weeks every year, that's not an entitlement. If someone says, oh, I want to take 4 weeks leave and they've only got 3 weeks accrued, well, again, depending on the circumstances, you are within your rights to say no. I would always look at whether it's doable first. But it's always important to explain to an employee that every situation is looked at on its merits at that time and the circumstances around it. It's really hard to get into too many specifics on it. But if it's just around an expectation that they've got an entitlement to take as much leave as they want because they're not being paid, you can shut that down and say, well, that's not the case. If you want to take 6 weeks leave, you've got to accrue 6 weeks before you're entitled to take it. But you always need to sort of understand the circumstances around it. Sometimes it might be that someone's got a holiday booked next year and then something's come up and they need leave now and they want to take it as leave without pay to save that leave. Depending on the reason behind it, you might say yes. If it's to go home for a week to attend a funeral, you might say yes. Or you might say, well, we might prefer you to take it at the other end. Again, there might be a bit of negotiation, but it's not a flat out yes or no. Okay, performance feedback and expectations. We cover a lot of this in our leadership training programs. So I'm not going to go into a massive amount of detail because it's something that we do go into a huge amount of detail in a lot of our training. But I'm going to cover a couple of issues that were raised. One of them was around those little micro issues, those smaller things and how you address them. I had a client that referred to these as marshmallows. They said to me one day, it's like this person's throwing marshmallows at me. And I said, you're going to have to give me more information. And they said, well, it's like there's lots of little issues, and none of it, like it's like they're like a marshmallow being thrown at my back. They're not leaving a bruise, but it's getting pretty annoying. Um, and I always think that it's easier to address things early when they're small issues than it is to wait until they're one big, large issue. But, a micro issue might be something that's like a small shift in behavioral performance. But if you don't sort of address it early, it can become a bit of a habit or a much larger issue. So we want to try and address it early. It can be that warning sign that there's something happening that needs to be addressed. So, you might be looking at things like suddenly someone's missing deadlines, or suddenly they become very short-tempered, or they're just not reliable, they're not, playing nicely with others, or, there could be a number of little things, either behavioral or performance pace, that come under that banner. So, what you want to do with any of these conversations is approach it with that mindset that something's changed and you just want to understand. This is not going to be a disciplinary meeting. It is, hey, I've just noticed a few small changes, and notice that I have highlighted the word noticed there, because that's your observation. You have observed something and you want to check in with them because that's unusual. That's a change. And so you've got some concern and you're just like, hey, is everything okay? Because if you have that conversation early, they might tell you exactly what's going on. It could be something that's happening work-wise. It could be that they're overloaded with work. Psychosocial hazards are a really big thing now, and we're going to be doing our first webinar in 2026 on it. And, it's your job as a leader to check in and say, hey, are you doing okay? Is there anything I can do to help you? It's about them feeling supported and not judged. Now, if they say, no, everything's okay, you might say, well, I've noticed a couple of these little things. These are concerning to me for these reasons, and I want you to work on them. In the case of the marshmallow conversation, yes, there are a lot of small things, and often people are hesitant to address the small things because they don't want to nitpick or micromanage. But what you need to do is sit back and go, what are those things? And often they might be several examples of a larger issue. So in the marshmallow example, she had like 12 little things that she told me, but they actually came under three sort of main themes. One of them being that someone was stepping outside their role quite a bit. One of them was how they were speaking to other people. So, suddenly they became examples of a larger area that needed to be addressed. So it's not about ignoring them. But it's not about making them a huge deal either. It's, hey, just, I just want to ask you what's going on here. Like, I noticed this, like you missed that deadline, and it could be something that's, out of their control. It could be something they go, yeah, look, I was just really tired, or whatever it might be. It's if it continues to be a pattern of behavior that you really might want to escalate it. Small conversations early, not hard conversations later. There was another question around expectations being misinterpreted, which can happen. I hate to break it to everybody, but if your expectations are being misinterpreted, you have to start by looking inwards and make sure that what you are providing them is really clear. But misunderstandings happen. Often people feel like they're being really clear in what they're asking of someone and the directions that they're giving. Again, we cover a lot of that in our leadership training of delegation and direction. And also, most people feel like they're doing a good job. And they might have a very different understanding what a good job is compared to what you do. And so there is a disconnect between the expectations. So, when you set clear expectations, being clear is about saying it out loud, being really like verbalizing it, showing them what success looks like with examples, and checking their understanding to make sure that you're on the same page. So, stepping back and going, have I been as clear as I can be? If you genuinely feel you have been, then that's the time to actually address it. So it really is your job to explore why that's happening. So if you feel that they're not meeting the expectations, you as a leader, it's your job to explore why. Can you walk me through what you believe the expectations were for this project? Because I want to make sure we're on the same page. Because again, coming back to what I am seeing, my observation is this. What I've observed is that maybe we're misaligned. So let's have a discussion so we can get back on the same page. Whoops. So it's really about building a shared understanding together, and so you can realign, not coming in and going, why are you not doing it the way I told you to do it? Because again, there can be so many other reasons for that to happen. Now, this was a really interesting one. It was about how do you get feedback to stick when someone has very low self-awareness. Some people genuinely don't have self-awareness. They don't see how their behaviours impact others. they've never been taught to self-reflect. It could be that they've just, no one's ever given them feedback about something like that before. And so that, they're really taken aback. That often happens when you delay giving feedback to someone on an issue. If you haven't addressed it early, talking about those micro things early, and you've just let it go, let it go, let it go, and suddenly 3 years down the track, you're like, this has been a real problem for a couple of years, of course the person's going to be surprised about it. But if you do feel like this person's really misaligned with their self-awareness, then you need to be really specific in the examples that you've given them and the impact of what that's having on other people. And again, first conversations should always be with curiosity to understand and learn and share information, not to be judging people and accusing them. So I've got a fairly generic example here. Like when a comment was made in the meeting, I noticed that a few people shut down. So again, that's what you noticed. I want to understand what was happening for you in that moment. So again, what made you make that comment? What made you say that out loud? Particularly when it's an inside thought. We covered that a bit in the leadership training too. So, you've got to really try and understand, but be very specific to what you're trying to share with them so that they understand. Some of the key principles when you are trying to get some feedback to stick, ask a lot of questions. You should not be doing all the talking. You're there to seek to understand what's happening and why it's happening. It's very much delivered at the behavior itself, not at the person specifically. Describe the impact with care. So what is the impact on other people? Do you realize that when you walk into the lunchroom and start banging and clanging things around, it makes others in the room feel like that you're mad or engaged, and it can have an impact on them? Again, it's so hard to have specific examples in some of these because every situation is nuanced. And you need to sort of invite their perspective and listen and have patience to try and understand it. You may not always understand. If someone's coming from a really weird perspective that you've never considered before, then you may not ever understand it, but at least you now understand where they're coming from. You may not understand why they come from that place, but you understand where they're coming from, and that can help you help them make corrections. And, coaching someone as a leader is very much about helping them be able to self-reflect. Like, would it be okay if I shared the impact that I saw and we could explore that together? But questions like, what impact do you think that would have had if you were in their shoes, are really good, because it's asking them to sort of think about something from a different perspective. Not everyone has that ability, but for the majority of people, they do. And again, if you can come in it from a tone and approach of collaboration rather than confrontation. We talk about conflict in the leadership training, and I always say, like, conflict is just a conversation. And it's just how that conversation is being taken by different parties, whether it's conflict or not. So if you go into a conversation expecting it to be conflict, it's probably going to end up in conflict. Whereas if you go in with, you can only control how you do things. So if you go in with the view of, hey, I'm here to learn and understand, it's much more likely to have a better outcome. There was also a couple of questions that were around career progression and having discussions around people moving up, particularly when their aspiration and enthusiasm may not necessarily match their capability, and how you provide clarity. So I think that that's a great question because it does come up quite a bit. And we've sort of addressed this a little bit with younger employees in our Gen Z and how to lead Gen Zs that we ran back in August. But the first thing you want to do is kind of appreciate their ambition and their enthusiasm. And like, I love that you want to grow and continue to move up in your career. Like, that's really something I'm happy to see that in you. But you need to add some clarity around why maybe now is not the time. So to step into that role, here's what I'm going to need to see from you. And that's your job as a leader, to kind of help them understand the steps that maybe that they're missing or not considering. Invite some a little bit of self-reflection, like, where do you feel confident? Where do you feel that you are? Where do you think you need more development, so you can understand where they're coming from? Again, not everybody has been taught how to do that. And particularly for younger employees, it's really good to take a little bit of time to help coach them through that moment and provide some clear direction. Here is what progress will look like. So over the next few months. So it's your job to consider that, okay, they want to move forward. How am I going to help them build a pathway to do that? just before I move off that, one of the things I'd really like you to think about in these sort of circumstances, and this doesn't matter how old someone is or where they are in their career, is it's your job to kind of, if you've been giving them really good, clear feedback along the way, then they should be very much understand where they're at. But one of the things you can do is sit down and put a correct progression plan together with them. Ask them to put together what they're looking for and what they see the timeline to be, and then use that as a catalyst of the conversation to reset expectations on why you may not agree with everything, or what you would need to see for them to, or what that you would need them to demonstrate to you for them to show you they are ready. Okay, some of the questions that we got, small deviations from expected behaviour. We've sort of covered this a little bit. Avoid treating these as disciplinary issues and just treat them as an invitation for a check-in. Something feels a bit different. I care about how you're going. Let's talk about what's happening and if you need any support. So that's, disciplinary action shouldn't be starting until you've had several of these conversations and the changes haven't happened. If someone is pushing for a promotion and they're not meeting the standards, again, acknowledge that ambition, that's great, but keep expectations from you very honest, but also in a kind way. Like, you don't have to be harsh about it. You just want to provide them that way forward. I can see your passion for taking the next step, but let's look together at the skills and behaviours that are going to be required for you to do that. And what are the things that we can get you involved with over time to help you develop those? Or what do you want to, how do you think you could develop those so that you could continue to progress? People don't know what they don't know. Misalignment of values and lack of self-reflection. Look, if someone's coming from a place, someone, you can see that somebody is really misaligned and really can't see that, then you need to come again from that noticing standpoint, not accusing. I've noticed some behaviours that don't seem to line up with the way we want to work as a team. Can we talk about what's happening in those moments and what's causing that, and why you're feeling like that's the appropriate behaviour? When expectations are being misunderstood, even though you think you're really clear, again, don't assume that the person's doing it on purpose. Assume that they want to do the right thing the most of the time, and that if you provide them some clarity, that will help. Reflect on what your part is. Were you as clear as you could be around the expectations? Could you remember, people take on information differently. Some people take on information by reading, others by listening, others by watching a video. There's lots of different ways. And did you send them a 30-page document and say, well, I was really clear on my expectations, and they didn't read it in great depth? You need to ensure that you've made sure that you're communicating to them in a way that works for them as well. And clarity is an ongoing conversation. It's not just a one-off. So this looks different to what I'd pictured it. Let's work out where we're misaligned so we can get back on the same page. And then another one that came in last minute, I managed to throw in a couple of last minute ones. I sort of had to cut it off at about 6:30, and you'll see the last couple of slides didn't actually get formatted properly because I was trying to add in some other questions that came in last minute. But one of the questions that came in was around requests to sort of step down in their role or reduce hours, and what that means in terms of pay and other things like that. So you need to understand that pay is usually not linked to the individual, it's linked to the role that they're doing. So if someone's saying, say for example, someone's in a team leader role and they're saying, look, this is too much for me, I need to step back and I want to just go back to being a member of the team, that the role itself is what held the salary, not the individual. They were getting paid that because they were in that role. So, if their duties have changed significantly and, the role they're going back to is a different role that has a different remuneration band, then it's absolutely valid that you can move them back to that when they have made the request. So if they have made a request to make that change, part of that discussion is you explaining, well, yeah, no, we're happy for you to move back to that role, but that will mean that your pay will go back to this pay band, so that they have all the information to make that decision. What you can't do, and we'd be getting into the realm of redundancies and things, is tell someone you're reducing their role and then just reduce their salary without any redundancy process or negotiation or consultation process. But in terms of if someone's asking to reduce their role or they're asking to reduce their hours, I have had instances where someone has asked to reduce their hours, someone's agreed and they go, oh, but I don't want my salary to change. That's unrealistic. If you're not working as many hours, you don't get paid as much money. That's just how it works. But yeah, a role itself is what gets the salary, not that individual. Just because there's only one person in the role doesn't make it that person's personal money. If they are voluntarily changing roles, then you're absolutely within your right to say, well, that's fine, but a part of that process will be that your salary will reduce. So the third theme I'm going to go through, and I'm going to try and do it quicker because I'm taking a lot too much time, but sick leave tends to do that. How to deal with people who are resistant to change. This comes up a lot. It's important to remember that most resistance to change does not come from just, the change itself. It's the fear, it's the anxiety around it. It can come from the fact that they've had bad experiences in the past. They're just wired that way, that change is not good. I mean, if someone's neurodivergent, for example, they might really struggle with change. And often that resistance is just self-protection. So you've just got to think about how you will deal with people who are showing resistance to a change. So, if you come from a supportive standpoint, like, okay, help me understand. So you've noticed there's emotion going on, or maybe there are some behaviors, but where are those behaviors coming from? Are they going around and bad mouthing the new change to everybody? Well, okay, that behavior is not acceptable. It needs to be addressed, but where is it coming from? Is it coming from fear? Is it coming from they're trying to stop something because they're really worried about it? Slow the conversation down and seek to find out what the real issue is. Is the issue that they think that this change is not great? Fine, give them the opportunity to tell you why and address their concerns. But if it's more around frustration or anger or fear or anxiety, like I can, again, this is your observations. I can really see that this change you're feeling quite frustrated about it. Can you tell me about what's worrying you so that I can hopefully address it for you? And coming at it from that perspective gives you really two things. One, it invites some honesty, and I always say in these situations, if someone's telling everybody else about the problem but not you, they're not telling the right person. If you're the person that can actually do something about it, that's the person they should be talking to. But also signals that you're at least trying to understand where they're coming from. Does it mean that you're going to do exactly what they want? Probably not. But at least you can have the opportunity to address it and hopefully allay some of their concerns. Some people just don't like change, and that's just the way it is. So what if you've got someone who is a chronic complainer and spends a lot of time complaining about everything? Often people who feel powerless and unheard are really good at complaining. But sometimes they just have good insight, but they just don't know how to express it. They don't know how to share that with people. So again, rather than going, oh my God, this person's complaining again, try and turn that around and reframe it to, okay, let's try and understand where they're coming from and see whether there's anything useful in there that we can turn that around to something positive. Maybe they have some good points that you haven't considered, but at least you're giving them the opportunity to be heard. Very similar to change. Then use a lot of questions to try and get them to move from being venting about the issue to problem solving. So, okay, what part of this is the most challenging for you? If you were going to do this, what do you suggest we do instead? Okay, saying you don't like what we're doing or you're complaining about this, what's your solution to it? What do you think would be more workable? You're putting it back on them. And if someone's got genuine concerns, this is where it'll come out. If they haven't, they're going to really struggle here and they're going, oh, well, I don't know. And say, well, right. So, you might get to the point where you go, okay, well, we are going to go down this path. We want you to come on board and come on this journey with us. I'm more than happy to address your concerns, but let's, how about we give it a go and see how it goes first? And then if you have feedback, I'd love to hear it. So some people just need to feel valued, and that if you give them the chance to contribute to the solution, that's all they need. Others, they're just going to be negative and, but even then, if you've gone through that process, they might be a little less defensive. They might be a little more accountable. But if that's an ongoing issue, then that should be being addressed in other ways. Expectations around flexibility. Look, employees can ask for flexibility. Some people have a legal right to ask for flexibility. There might be more support, it might be more autonomy, it might be working from home. There can be so many things of flexibility, so it's kind of hard to address when it's not really specific. But the fact that someone's making that request on its own is not an issue. The challenge is how you're going to balance that with business needs. And so that's where, again, and a lot of these are, a conversation needs to happen. So in that instance, you want to really, again, be honest, but also empathetic. Like, help me understand what you're hoping for. And let's also be clear about what the business can provide. So it's a two-way conversation. You're not trying to shut it down, you're trying to understand. And at least then they feel heard. Maybe they can, alternatives can be suggested. Often when there's a request for flexibility, it doesn't have to be an all or nothing situation. It may be that, look, we could do this part of it, but we can't accommodate that for these reasons. Would that be of interest to you? And you can go back and forth and see if that you can find a solution together. This is always an interesting one when staff ask for more, but performance is mediocre. So if you've got someone who's saying, hey, I want more money, I want more responsibility, but they're not delivering on what's expected, very similar to the career progression conversation. The aim is to bring it back to fairness and contribution. So I want to talk to you about your request, but I also want to make sure that we look at it through the lens of your current performance and what feels fair and reasonable for everybody. So it's not just about what you want, but the context which you're asking for it, and managing expectations. Skip through these to get them to the end. So once you've kind of had that conversation and gone, okay, you help me understand why you're asking for it and what basis you're asking for it, then you can move to clarifying. So you acknowledge that the request that they've made. You can maybe reflect using some examples on why you believe their current performance level does not warrant that at this point in time. So it's a case of, this is not an all or nothing. It's right now, because you haven't been delivering things on time, because you have been causing a few behavioural issues, whatever it is, I'm not willing to look at, progressing you until those things are resolved or addressed or actioned. So at least you might want to put some conditions around what that would look like, and offer support to help them improve. Give them the support they need. You don't want to reward entitlement. Like, some people are like, oh, well, I've been here 3 years and that person's been promoted and I haven't, I'm entitled to it. No, you're not. You're not the same person. You're not delivering the same things. But you also, as a leader, need to be clear on why you're saying no, or what's concerning you to not do it. And if you haven't addressed those things, that's on you. You should have already addressed these things so that they're aware of that. But this is a good point to have that conversation and go, well, actually, you're not meeting the expectations, and here's why I don't think you are, or here's why you're not performing at that level, or here's what this person's demonstrated, which is why they have received that progression and you haven't. So you have to have specific examples. If you can't explain that to me, you're not ready to explain it to your employee. And there's no guarantee to keep someone motivated in that instance. But if you're supportive about helping them work out how to fix it and move forward, then great. If the person has an expectation it's going to be now, there's not much you can do about that. So again, we've kind of covered a little bit of this, but the question around, when someone is pushing back on every single change, it's probably not around the change. It may be that feeling of out of control. Just come at it with that curious approach. Ask questions like, tell me what part of this feels hardest for you, and so you can sort of address it. Requests for more conditions of improvement without getting anything extra in return for the business. Well, again, it's that balanced conversation, right? So acknowledge their needs, but reinforcing why it's not possible now. I hear what you're asking for. Before we go any further, we need to look together about where you're currently performing, so we can make sure that anything that we do moving forward is fair and sustainable. And right now, if you're not performing in your current role, why would we give you more, or why would we progress you through? You need to show that you're capable first. And we shouldn't be rewarding anybody with promotions and things if they're underperforming in any areas. And this was another last minute one, when employees are just never happy. Got negative Nancy on your team. Some people are just going to be unhappy no matter what, and no matter how much support you receive. Same way as people might resist change regardless. It can be so many reasons that that's happening for them. It's not your job to fix the emotion for them. You can create a space where they feel listened to. You can try and help them reframe and shift their focus to something that is more positive. You can try and understand where they're coming from, but ultimately you can't make someone who is always unhappy happy. Some people are just wired that way. And the question, of course, is whether or not it's an issue for the workplace is the impact it's having. And that's what you always need to come back to. Is there an impact that it's having? And if so, what you do need to address it. If it's just that it's slightly annoying to everybody, I mean, it certainly could be impacting culture, and that could be feedback you give. It may not be aligned with your values. That might be feedback you can give, but you have to be able to really show the impact to address it. So moving into leadership and respect, a couple of other questions we had. When there's a bit of a gap around respect or trust, or it might be around authority because somebody, you know, doesn't feel like you should be in the role, there can be lots of reasons. But I think it's really important to respect and trust and authority. They build over time. They're not just something from a single moment. And leadership is more than just a title. So if we're talking about someone who's in a leadership role and then I don't feel like they're being respected, or their authority is not being respected, then that has to be built. You know, for some, and again, it depends on how the employees are wired, right? So some people are going to respect you based on your title until you give them a reason not to. Other people are going to go, well, yeah, you've got the title, but you have to earn my respect. Other people just give it to you automatically. So respect can be whittled away through misunderstandings, or when there's boundaries that are not clear, when the communication is not indirect, or there's assumptions about who should be doing what. That can reduce the respect between people. So these might come about when someone's promoted from within and the peer, you know, the other people in the team still see them as a member of the team. Sometimes that can come from age differences or experience gaps, where somebody maybe thinks that you shouldn't be, you know, their leader because of you're younger than them, or they feel that they've got better experience. You might just be managing someone who's very naturally dominant or outspoken, and it might feel disrespectful. There could be missed messages about expectations, or if you're avoiding conflict as a leader, that can actually tell other people that you don't deserve their respect and authority because you're just avoiding conflict all the time and you only deal with the things that are easy. So it's usually a mix of sitting down and working out what's coming from you as an individual that you can change, and what's coming from the people who are working for you, and trying to find that disconnect. Um, the way you build respect and trust, and again, we talk about this a lot in our leadership training, it comes through behavior, not the title. You know, someone can give you the authority. Absolutely, if you've been promoted from within, it's up to your senior leaders to make sure everyone understands your authority levels, what your job is, and what your responsibilities are. But you've got to be consistent. You've got to follow through in what you say you're going to do. You've got to be clear in how you communicate decisions clearly and calmly. You've got to check your own self-doubt, because it will show up. It'll show up in how you're delivering things. If you're doing everything as a bit of a suggestion or apologising constantly, you do need to be open to feedback though, and willing to make adjustments. And, you know, it's really great when you're a new leader to say, hey, like, you know, I'd like some feedback from you on how I'm going and could I be doing things differently? And a respectful dynamic between people isn't about power. It's about clarity and fairness and trust. And, you know, respect and trust is built over time. It can be eroded over time, but it can also be built. So it's about, you know, sometimes that's a really good time to get some leadership coaching to try and work out where the issue is. Is it coming from you, or is it coming from your team? If you know it's coming from the team, then there may be some behaviours that need to be dealt with, because they do need to respect the fact that you're their boss. Which kind of leads us into younger leaders, that it might be, you know, building to leading more confidently. Often when you're new to leadership, you might swing between being a little bit too soft or too hard, or you might just pick one and just go with it. Often we might look to a previous leader we've had and try and emulate that. We need to make sure when you're in that role that it's, you know, is there a skill gap there that you have that needs to be filled, or is it just an insecurity issue? But you can sort of, you've got to build your own presence in that role. So you want to make sure that you use a lot of I statements when you make decisions. You know, make sure that you take the time to make sure your voice is heard. You need to prepare when there's going to be a conversation that's difficult that you've never had before. We help a lot of new leaders to go through those. But also ask a lot of questions of people, show curiosity, don't get defensive. Say, okay, look, you know, that feels a bit disrespectful to me. Can you help me understand why you don't think that what I've asked you to do is the right thing to do? Or, you know, again, questions are gold, because if you ask that question and they don't know the answer, then it tells that very quickly they're going to realize they're in the wrong. You might want to, there's a couple of phrases here that might be helpful. So I want to acknowledge your experience here, but here's a direction that I want to take moving forward. So you're acknowledging that the person who's maybe disagreeing with you or has good experience, and I acknowledge that you've got that experience, but I've made this decision and this is how we're going to move forward. So you're still acknowledging that, yes, you've heard them, but as I said, confidence is not loud, it's steady and respectful and consistent. It's the actions that you take. And again, you only can control what you do. You can't control how others respond. Calm, confident, and grounded. Um, Sometimes there's a bit of a lack of respect due to that age or experience. So if you feel like someone's dismissing you because you're younger or you're new to leadership, it's usually, it might be more about the fact that they're uncertain about you yet and they haven't decided whether they trust you as a leader. But it also could be a habit. They're used to going to someone else and they just don't even think about it, that they've been disrespectful to you or dismissing you. So that calm consistency is what's going to build that up. And, but be willing to listen and learn and work together with people. Anyone can be a great leader. Age is not an indication of whether you're a good leader. Experience is not an indication if you're a good leader. Believe me, 30 odd years in HR has taught me that. But you've got to work out what your path is and sort of stick to it. Now, there was a question as well about managing colleagues who are also close friends. That dynamic can be really tricky. And it's as a leader, you do need to make sure that there's boundaries when it's applicable. So sometimes that can, and look, that happens when you're in different roles too. Like if you work in HR, there's been times I've been friends with people, but I've had to go in and help and terminate them with their manager, or I've had to do a disciplinary meeting. And so there's always a bit of a balance when whether you're a leader in a role where there could be a bit of a conflict. So you want to be upfront. Like if you've moved into this leadership role, you might say, look, I value our friendship and I want it to continue, but there's going to be times when I'm going to have my manager's hat on, and I'll let you, and sometimes I might need to clarify that. And if you feel like somebody is sort of still just treating you as a friend when they should be treating you as a manager, you might have to go, hang on, like, I know we're friends, but right now we're having a conversation about your performance. The fact that we're friends is irrelevant. What's relevant is the feedback that I've given you. This is not a personal conversation. This is why I'd be having this conversation with anyone else. So it can be difficult personally to navigate. And it's just important that, you make sure that you realize where the boundaries need to be. And if they are blurred, you reset them. And finally, because I did start a little late, so hopefully I won't go too far over. What do you do when a group excludes others? Again, this is really important when it comes to psychosocial hazards and things like that. And we're definitely going to address a lot of that in our next webinar. But look, exclusion can show up in many forms. Exclusion can actually be considered bullying if it's an ongoing pattern of behavior. Like there could be lots of little things that do contribute to it, and particularly in a small business environment, if someone's being excluded, it can feel, or a small team, it can feel really damaging to that person. So what you want to do is again, not find out and understand. So it may be that people don't realize they're doing it, and they're unaware of their behavior. So we always start with creating awareness. Like I noticed that a few people are feeling a bit lifted out of the loop lately. So I want to talk about it because I want to make sure everyone feels included. I'm sure you feel the same way. You might find out other information at that point. But as a manager, if you're observing some sort of behavior going on in your workplace that just is not sitting right with you, or it's setting off your red flag, you can't just ignore it. You really need to delve into it. And we'll talk about that a lot in the next webinar, that, if you're aware, whether it's a physical safety or a psychosocial safety hazard that's happening, once you're aware of it, you have to do something about it. You can't just ignore it until someone makes a formal complaint. If you've got someone who is not necessarily, or your culture's a little off, or maybe you've got somebody who is not necessarily aligned with your values, starting with the values is a good place to start, particularly if you do have strong values in your business. So, and I'm not talking about slogans or posters, but actually making sure everybody's on the same page about what they mean. So it might be a bit of a team meeting to bring everyone together and go, hey, I really felt like there's a bit of a shift in the dynamic. Let's revisit our values and talk about what they mean and what they should look like in everyday behavior. What behaviors would we be seeing in the workplace if we're living our values? What behaviors might we see when people are living outside of our values? Ask them to identify moments where they may not have felt aligned with them, and what might need to change, or and maybe getting everyone to commit to some behaviours that everyone's going to commit to live those behaviours moving forward. When there's a difference of when it's one person versus where it's become a bit of an ongoing issue. There's a lot of things that you can do. And someone put workplace culture as one of the issues, like for things to be dealt with. We can do a whole webinar on that, but culture's so many little things together that it's very difficult to just go, here's a tick box of things that you can do. But starting with a bit of a reset, let's get everybody back on the same page and try and get them moving in the same direction is a great way to do that. And there's a lot of tools, and we might do a specific webinar on that next year. Here's just a really good little hint and tip on when to step in and make, particularly when there's a conflict, there's a bit of a clique that's formed. When do you want to actually step in and do something versus when do you just want to observe? So you want to make sure you step in when you feel that someone is being excluded or harmed, and it's potentially stepping into sort of, risky, territory in terms of someone's psychosocial well-being, mental health. If something's affecting morale or performance, if you're seeing behaviours that, you can see that are impacting, you need to deal with them. Absolutely, when someone's raised concerns, you need to at least be investigating or addressing them. And when you just see that change in that dynamic, so again, we'll probably go into it a lot more when we talk about culture specifically. But sometimes you do need to sit back and observe first. So if it's only a little small issue, you might want to sit back and see whether or not they can course correct on their own. If you don't have all the information, that's not when you want to step in. You might start with some information gathering or more observation before you go down that path. And you need to understand what's actually happening before you try and intervene and fix it. Because if you don't have all the information, you might be dealing with the wrong thing. So one of the issues that came up in one of the questions, just to finish off, was cliques forming and how it's impacting morale. So it is absolutely normal for people to gravitate towards people they get along with, or to, maybe they started at the same time and they got a little bit of a bond together. Maybe they've worked together for a long time and they've got a bit of a bond together. But it's when it starts to get very exclusive and, we're excluding others and, it's us versus them, and there's, it can start to really affect the team dynamic. So start with curiosity, just I've noticed a bit of a shift. I've noticed there seems to be a little bit of us versus them. Am I imagining it? Is that something that's happening? Is that something you're experiencing? Ask other leaders if you've got other leaders around you what they're observing, and are they seeing the same things? It's not about breaking up friendships or anything. It's just making sure that your team dynamics are not becoming like very siloed. And there's a lot of things that you can do, and we might maybe touch on some of those when we do talk about culture in a webinar next year, because you do need to address those issues if they've come to your attention. And yeah, you want to make sure that it's psychologically safe for everybody. So my final thoughts. I would have been right on time if I hadn't started a little bit late. Clear is unkind, clear is kind, unclear is unkind. I just really thought that was appropriate from here, because of so many of the issues people raise were things that often there's assumptions being made, and they don't have all the information, and you get that by talking to people. Once you've got all the information, if there's an issue, absolutely we can go in and address it. But so often when someone thinks it's an issue, they're jumping the gun. They're several steps ahead of, based on a lot of assumptions, not on fact. We start with we only make decisions and take action based on fact, things we can observe, things that we have enough information about to know that that's actually happening. And so the more clear you can be up front, part of what we do in our leadership training is to try and help people build great teams and set people up for success with clear expectations, clear clear boundaries, holding them accountable so that we can avoid having trickier issues. But if you do set things up well and you build trust and you build relationships with people, if something's going wrong, it's a lot easier to have those conversations. As I mentioned, our next webinar will be Understanding Psychosocial Hazards and Risk. That will be with Ella and myself in late January, just before Australia Day weekend, and we're going to really deep dive there. There are some new laws in Victoria that are coming into place on the 1st of December that are making the psychosocial hazards, they have to be treated the same way that a physical hazard is, which means that you've got to show that you're trying to prevent them, not that you're just dealing with them when they happen. most other states are going to follow suit not too far down the track. So really good opportunity to start the year with getting a really good understanding of that. We're also about to launch all of our new training for 2026. The calendar's just being finalised now. We're just finalising some venues and things. We've got some new training we're launching. Unfortunately, we're no longer doing mental health first aid, but we can refer you to somebody if you need to. But for me, that is all for now. That's all the places you can find us. What I want to do is open it up to anyone. So if anyone does have a question, if you'd like to throw it in the Q&A, I would be absolutely more than happy to answer any other questions before I jump off tonight. Otherwise, as always, Strawberry Seed is here to help you with those questions and those issues. I wish that it was easier to just give specific yes, no, black and white ways of dealing with a lot of the things that were raised in the questions. And I really appreciate that a lot of people put some good things in there, and hopefully we answered some of those questions as best we can. But often it's really nuanced. You need to just realize that every situation that does come up is usually specific to the circumstances, the experience of that person, the age of that person, the dynamic in the workplace. There's so many things that go into play. And so often having a chat with someone like our team at Strawberry Seed can be really helpful to help you navigate through that and work out what the real issues are. And if it's a person issue, or whether it's an organisational or procedural issue that needs to be addressed first. But I haven't had any new questions thrown in. I really appreciate this time of the year. I know it's getting busy. There's a lot of school things on. I'm really grateful this time of year that my youngest is 18 and I no longer have to do any of those things. But this is our last one for the year. Thank you so much for attending. You know, we see a lot of the same names pop up in registrations, and we really appreciate that support. As always, we are here to help if you need us to. And we hope that if we don't talk to you, you have a great Christmas and New Year. The world does not end on the 31st of December. You know, things can wait until January. You know, sometimes it's better to take a breath and reflect on something over Christmas as a leader before you come back and address it in January. And then you know it's actually a real issue. It's not just something that you're burnt out to the end of the year and just that's driving you a bit crazy. So wish you all the best, and we will see you in 2026. Thank you.